The snow was falling sideways, each flake like a tiny knife against my cheek. My fingers were numb, pressing against the glass of what used to be my bedroom window. Inside, I could see my desk lamp still on, my textbooks scattered exactly where I'd left them 3 hours ago when everything was still normal, when I still had a home. The porch light stayed off no matter how many times I rang the doorbell, no matter how hard I pounded on the door that had welcomed me every day for 17 years, until tonight. My breath fogged the window as I pressed my face closer, watching the digital clock on my nightstand flip to 11:47 p.m. My parents were inside. I could see the blue glow of the television flickering in the living room downstairs. They knew I was out here. They put me here. And they weren't coming to let me in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sage Martinez, and if you think this story is about a teenager who broke curfew and learned her lesson, you're wrong. This is about the night I discovered that love can have conditions so brutal, they'll freeze you to death on your own front porch. This is about what happens when perfection becomes a prison and your own family holds the key. It started at dinner. Mom had set the table with the good china, the white plates with tiny blue flowers that we only use when someone important was coming over. But tonight it was just us. Dad sat at the head of the table in his pressed shirt and tie, even though he'd been home from the law firm for hours. Mom wore her pearl earrings, the ones she saved for church and parent-teacher conferences. Everything looked perfect. Everything always looked perfect in the Martinez house. I slid into my usual seat, still wearing my soccer cleats because practice had run late and I'd rushed home to make it in time for family dinner. The muddy cleats left small dark prints on the pristine hardwood floor, and I watched Mom's eyes track each mark like tiny failures. "Sage, your shoes," she said quietly, the way she always did when disappointment was brewing. "Sorry, I'll clean it up after dinner. Coach made us run extra drills because we have regionals next week, and I didn't want to be late for—" "You'll clean it up now," Dad interrupted, not looking up from his plate. His voice carried that edge that meant the conversation was already over, even though it had barely begun. I glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. We'd been sitting for exactly 3 minutes. "Can I just eat first? I haven't had anything since lunch, and—" "Now, Sage." Mom's voice was softer than Dad's, but somehow sharper. "You know better than to track mud through the house. What if we had guests? What if someone saw?" The someone who might see was always lurking in our conversations, invisible judges who apparently watched our every move, waiting for us to slip up, to prove we weren't the family we pretended to be. I stood up slowly, my stomach cramping with hunger, and walked to the closet to get the cleaning supplies. As I knelt on the floor with paper towels and spray cleaner, Mom continued setting the table as if nothing had happened. Dad read emails on his phone. The dinner Mom had spent 2 hours preparing sat getting cold while I scrubbed away evidence of my existence. "Sage, Mrs. Henderson called today," Mom said as I wiped the last mark from the floor. Mrs. Henderson was my AP history teacher, and my stomach dropped because I knew exactly what this was about. "About what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Your grade on the midterm exam. She said you received an 87%. Mom's voice made it sound like I'd committed a felony. I sat back down, finally reaching for my fork. "That's still an A-. That's still good." Dad looked up from his phone for the first time since I'd walked in the door. "Good isn't what we expect from you, Sage. Good is what average students achieve. You're not average." "But I studied for hours. I know that material inside and out. The test was just—" "Just what? Just an excuse?" Mom's pearl earrings caught the light as she shook her head. "Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now." I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold, and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. "I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there?" Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse than being ignored.
First, it was the chemistry teacher who supposedly taught the wrong formulas. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Now it's the history teacher who tested material you hadn't studied. When are you going to take responsibility for your own performance? My chest tightened. I never said those things. I never blamed the teachers. I just said, you said exactly what underachievers say when they can't meet expectations. Mom's pearl earrings caught the light as she shook her head. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now. I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there? Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse than being ignored. First, it was the chemistry teacher who supposedly taught the wrong formulas. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Now it's the history teacher who tested material you hadn't studied. When are you going to take responsibility for your own performance? My chest tightened. I never said those things. I never blamed the teachers. I just said, you said exactly what underachievers say when they can't meet expectations. Mom's pearl earrings caught the light as she shook her head. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now. I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold, and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there? Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse than being ignored. First, it was the chemistry teacher who supposedly taught the wrong formulas. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Now it's the history teacher who tested material you hadn't studied. When are you going to take responsibility for your own performance? My chest tightened. I never said those things. I never blamed the teachers. I just said, you said exactly what underachievers say when they can't meet expectations. Mom's pearl earrings caught the light as she shook her head. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now. I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there? Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse than being ignored. First, it was the chemistry teacher who supposedly taught the wrong formulas. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Now it's the history teacher who tested material you hadn't studied. When are you going to take responsibility for your own performance? My chest tightened. I never said those things. I never blamed the teachers. I just said, you said exactly what underachievers say when they can't meet expectations. Mom's pearl earrings caught the light as she shook her head. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now. I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there? Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse than being ignored. First, it was the chemistry teacher who supposedly taught the wrong formulas. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Now it's the history teacher who tested material you hadn't studied. When are you going to take responsibility for your own performance? My chest tightened. I never said those things. I never blamed the teachers. I just said, you said exactly what underachievers say when they can't meet expectations. Mom's pearl earrings caught the light as she shook her head. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now. I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold, and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there? Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse than being ignored. First, it was the chemistry teacher who supposedly taught the wrong formulas. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Now it's the history teacher who tested material you hadn't studied. When are you going to take responsibility for your own performance? My chest tightened. I never said those things. I never blamed the teachers. I just said, you said exactly what underachievers say when they can't meet expectations. Then it was the English teacher who graded too hard. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this family's reputation for you to start making excuses now. I took a bite of the chicken, which had gone cold and tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what happened. The essay questions were about material we hadn't covered yet, and there's always something, isn't there? Dad set his phone down completely now, which meant I had his full attention. This was worse.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sit down, Dad said sharply. We're not finished talking. What else is there to talk about? You've made it pretty clear that I'm a disappointment. You're being dramatic, Mom said. We're trying to help you understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that an A- makes me mediocre. I understand that everything I do is wrong. I understand that you care more about what other people think than about how I feel. I was standing now, my hands shaking with frustration and hunger and something deeper that I couldn't name. Dad stood up too, his face red with anger. You want to know what's disappointing, Sage? It's watching your daughter throw a tantrum instead of accepting constructive criticism. It's watching her make excuses instead of making improvements. It's watching her act like a child when we're trying to treat her like an adult. I'm not throwing a tantrum. I'm trying to tell you how I feel. How you feel, Mom said, standing now too, is less important than how you perform. Feelings don't get you into college. Feelings don't build a career. Feelings don't create the kind of life we want for you. The room felt like it was shrinking. What about the kind of life I want for me? You don't know what kind of life you want, Dad said. You're too young and too emotional to make those decisions. That's why you have us. I looked around the dining room, at the perfect furniture and perfect decorations and perfect family portrait on the wall. Everything in its place, everything carefully arranged to show the world how successful and happy we were. Everything except me. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. Can't do what? Mom asked. I can't pretend to be perfect. I can't pretend that an A- is the end of the world. I can't pretend that what you want for me is the same as what I want for myself. Dad's face went very still. You can and you will, because that's what being part of this family means. It means holding yourself to a higher standard. What if I don't want to be part of this family anymore? The words came out like a gunshot in the quiet room. I hadn't meant to say them, hadn't even known I was thinking them, but once they were out there, hanging in the air between us, I realized they were true. Mom's face went white. Dad's hands clenched into fists at his sides. What did you just say? His voice was deadly quiet. I said, what if I don't want to be part of this family anymore? What if I'm tired of never being good enough? What if I want to find out who I am when I'm not constantly trying to meet your expectations? You ungrateful, Dad started, but Mom put a hand on his arm. Sage, Mom said, her voice trembling, you're upset. You don't mean that. I do mean it. I mean every word. I'm tired of feeling like a disappointment. I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own house. I'm tired of feeling like I have to earn your love by being perfect. Our love isn't conditional, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Because it sure feels like it. It feels like you love the idea of me, the perfect daughter you want me to be, but you don't love the real me, the me that gets A- sometimes, the me that tracks mud on the floor, the me that wants something different than what you've planned. Dad took a step toward me. You want to know about love, Sage? Love is giving your child every advantage. Love is pushing them to be their best. Love is not letting them settle for less than they're capable of. That's not love, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. That's control. The words seemed to hit Dad like a physical blow. His face darkened. Control? Control is what keeps this family together. Control is what makes us successful. Control is what separates us from the families that fall apart because they let their children run wild. I don't want to run wild. I just want to be myself. And if yourself isn't good enough, Mom asked, if yourself is mediocre and average and ordinary, what then? I stared at her, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to walk and read and tie my shoes. This woman who apparently believed that the real me, the unpolished me, the imperfect me, wasn't worth loving. Then I guess I'll find people who think I am good enough, I said. Dad's face went from red to purple. Fine. If that's what you want, if you want to find out what it's like to be on your own, to see how far your attitude gets you in the real world, then go ahead. David, Mom said quietly, but he held up a hand. No, Patricia. She wants to know what it's like to not be part of this family. Let her find out. Let her see what it's like to make it on her own without our support, without our guidance, without everything we've provided for her. My heart started beating faster. What are you saying? I'm saying, if you don't want to be part of this family, then you don't get the benefits of being part of this family. You don't get our house, our food, our support. You want independence? You want to find out who you are without us? Go ahead. The room went completely silent. Mom was staring at Dad like she'd never seen him before. I felt like I was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. You're kicking me out? My voice came out as a whisper. You're choosing, Dad said. You made that choice when you decided we weren't good enough for you. That's not what I said. I never said you weren't good enough. I said I wasn't good enough for you. Same difference. If you can't appreciate what we've given you, if you can't respect what we've built, then maybe you need to learn what life is like without it. Mom was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away with her napkin. David, please, she's just upset. She doesn't mean it. Don't I asked, and for the first time in my life, I felt something like power. Maybe I do mean it. Maybe I am tired of this. Maybe I do want to find out who I am without constantly trying to be who you want me to be. Dad nodded slowly. Fine, then pack a bag. You have 10 minutes. David, Mom's voice was sharp now. No, Patricia. She wants to be independent. She wants to see what life is like without our expectations. Let her find out. I stood there for a moment, not quite believing this was happening. An hour ago, I'd been a teenager coming home from soccer practice. Now I was being kicked out of my house because I'd gotten an A- and dared to say it felt like they didn't love me for who I was. 10 minutes, Sage. Starting now. I walked upstairs like I was sleepwalking. My room looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left for school that morning. My bed was made with hospital corners the way Mom had taught me. My desk was organized with color-coded folders and perfectly aligned notebooks. My soccer trophies lined the shelf, all silver and gold and proof of excellence. I pulled a duffel bag from my closet and started throwing things into it. Clothes, toiletries, my phone charger. I grabbed the small amount of cash I had from babysitting jobs and my debit card. I took the necklace my grandmother had given me before she died, the only thing in my room that felt purely mine. As I packed, I could hear my parents arguing downstairs. Mom's voice was high and strained. Dad's was low and firm. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew this script. Mom would plead and cry and try to be the peacemaker. Dad would stand firm and talk about principles and consequences. And in the end, Dad would win, because Dad always won. 10 minutes felt like 10 seconds. I stood at the top of the stairs with my bag, looking down at the perfect house I'd grown up in. The house where every surface was polished and every corner was clean, and every picture was straight. The house where I'd never quite fit, never quite been enough. Dad was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Mom was nowhere to be seen. "Ready?" he asked, like we were going on a casual trip. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "That's up to you. You wanted independence. This is what independence looks like." "I'm 17 years old. I'm still in high school. I don't have anywhere to go." "You should have thought of that before you decided our family wasn't good enough for you." I walked down the stairs slowly, each step feeling final. At the bottom, I turned toward the kitchen, thinking maybe I could grab some food, but Dad blocked my path. "The bag is all you get," he said.
Everything else belongs to this family, the family you don't want to be part of. I stared at him. This man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and told me bedtime stories. This man who was now looking at me like I was a stranger who had broken into his house. "Dad," I said quietly, "I never said I didn't want to be part of the family. I said I wanted to be myself within the family." "Same thing," he said. "In this family, we don't accept less than excellence. We don't make excuses. We don't feel sorry for ourselves. If you can't do that, then you don't belong here." He opened the front door, and cold air rushed in, carrying snowflakes that immediately began melting on the warm hardwood floor. More mess for someone to clean up. "It's snowing," I said stupidly. "Then you'd better find somewhere warm to go." I stepped outside, and he closed the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt turn, the sound echoing in the winter night like a gunshot. I stood on the porch for a moment, waiting for him to change his mind, waiting for the door to open, waiting for this to be some kind of terrible lesson that would end with a hug and a promise to do better. The porch light stayed off. I walked to the sidewalk and looked back at the house. It looked exactly the same as it always had. Perfect lawn, perfect landscaping, perfect facade. The only difference was that I was no longer inside it. I started walking, not sure where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stand there anymore. The snow was coming down harder now, and I could feel it melting through my sneakers. I hadn't thought to grab a coat. I'd been wearing a t-shirt and jeans because the house was always perfectly heated. And now, the cold was cutting through the thin fabric like it was nothing. I walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. My teeth were chattering, and my fingers were numb around the handle of my duffel bag. I passed house after house, all of them warm and lit, and full of families who were probably sitting down to dinner or watching TV or doing homework together. I thought about calling someone, but who? My friends all lived with their parents, and it was almost midnight on a school night. My extended family lived across the country, and even if they didn't, what would I say? That my parents had kicked me out for getting an A- and questioning their definition of love? I found myself standing in front of the Henderson's house. Mrs. Henderson, my AP history teacher, the one who had given me the 87% that had started this whole nightmare. Her porch light was on, and I could see warm yellow light spilling from her living room windows. For a moment, I considered knocking on her door. She was a teacher. She was a mandated reporter. She would know what to do with a teenager who had been locked out of her house in a snowstorm. But then I imagined having to explain why I was there, having to admit that my parents had thrown me out, having to see the pity in her eyes when she realized that the girl from the perfect family wasn't so perfect after all. I kept walking. The neighborhood grew quieter as I moved away from the main streets. The houses were smaller here, older, with cars parked in driveways instead of garages and toys scattered in yards. Normal houses, where normal families lived normal lives. I was shivering so hard now that I could barely hold on to my bag. My feet were soaked, and I couldn't feel my toes. The snow was sticking to my hair and my eyelashes, and every breath felt like swallowing ice. I found myself on Maple Street, standing in front of a small blue house with a crooked mailbox and a garden that looked like it had been planted by someone who cared more about flowers than perfection. The porch light was on, and through the front window I could see an older woman in a robe standing at her kitchen sink. I don't know what made me choose that house. Maybe it was the way the light looked, warm instead of harsh. Maybe it was the fact that there were wind chimes on the porch that moved gently in the breeze, making soft musical sounds. Maybe it was desperation. I walked up the front steps, raised my hand to knock, and then stopped. What was I doing? I couldn't just knock on a stranger's door at midnight and ask for help. I couldn't burden some random person with my problems. But as I stood there, debating, the cold seemed to seep deeper into my bones. My shivers were becoming violent now, and I realized that I was in real danger. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was the kind of cold that could hurt me. I knocked softly, barely loud enough to hear. Nothing happened. I knocked again, a little louder. The woman at the kitchen sink looked up, peering toward the front door. She walked over slowly, probably wondering who could be visiting so late. "Hello?" she called through the door. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, my voice shaking so hard I could barely get the words out. I need help. I heard the deadbolt turn, and the door opened a few inches, revealing a woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. She took one look at me, standing there in the snow, shivering and clearly in distress, and opened the door wide. "Oh, honey," she said, come in right now." I stepped inside, and the warmth hit me like a wall. I immediately started shivering even harder as my body began to thaw. "What in the world are you doing out there?" she asked, closing the door quickly behind me. "You're soaked through. You must be freezing." "I'm sorry," I said through chattering teeth. "I didn't know where else to go." She looked at me for a moment, taking in my wet clothes, my duffel bag, the fact that I was clearly a teenager with no adult supervision at midnight in a snowstorm. "What's your name, honey?" she asked gently. Sage Martinez. "I'm Helen Morrison, and you're going to tell me what's going on while I get you some warm clothes and something hot to drink." She disappeared into what I assumed was a bedroom and came back with a thick sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants. "These might be a little big, but they're warm and dry. The bathroom is right down the hall."
Get changed and then come back out here. I changed quickly, grateful for the warmth of the dry clothes, even though they hung loose on my frame. When I came back out, Helen had a mug of hot chocolate waiting for me and a thick blanket draped over the couch. "Sit," she said, and I gratefully sank into the cushions, wrapping the blanket around myself and holding the mug with both hands. "Now," Helen said, settling into the chair across from me, "tell me what's going on. Why is a teenage girl walking around my neighborhood alone in a snowstorm at midnight?" I stared into the hot chocolate, watching the marshmallows slowly dissolve. How could I possibly explain what had happened? How could I make this kind stranger understand that my parents had thrown me out for not being perfect enough? "I had a fight with my parents," I said finally. "It must have been some fight," Helen said gently. "Most parents don't let their children walk around in the snow, no matter how angry they are." They told me to leave." Helen was quiet for a moment. "They told you to leave, or they kicked you out?" "They kicked me out." The words felt strange in my mouth, too big and too terrible to be real. "For how long?" "I don't know. Maybe forever." Helen's face darkened. "Honey, how old are you?" 17. "And they kicked you out in the middle of winter at night with nowhere to go?" When she said it like that, it sounded even worse than it had felt. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Helen stood up abruptly. "I'm calling the police." "No," I said quickly. "Please don't. It'll just make everything worse." "Worse than being homeless in a snowstorm?" "You don't understand. My dad is a lawyer. My family, we're supposed to be perfect. If the police get involved, if this gets out, it'll ruin everything." "Honey," Helen said gently, "it sounds like everything is already ruined." She was right, but I couldn't bear the thought of making this public, of having the whole neighborhood know that the perfect Martinez family was falling apart. I couldn't bear the thought of my parents' humiliation, even after what they'd done to me. "Please," I said, "just let me stay here tonight. I'll figure something out in the morning." Helen looked at me for a long moment, clearly torn between what she knew was right and what I was asking her to do. "One night," she said finally, "but tomorrow we're going to figure out a real solution. This can't continue." I nodded gratefully, even though I had no idea what a real solution would look like. Helen made up the couch for me with sheets and pillows and an extra blanket. She showed me where everything was in case I needed anything during the night. She was kind and gentle and didn't ask any more questions, but I could see the worry in her eyes. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the snow tap against the windows, I thought about my parents. Were they worried about me? Were they wondering where I was, if I was safe? Or were they relieved to have the imperfect daughter out of their perfect house? I thought about what would happen tomorrow. Would they call the school when I didn't come home? Would they report me as a runaway? Or would they simply pretend I had never existed, edit me out of their perfect family portrait like a mistake that needed correcting?
I thought about Mrs. Henderson's phone call, the one that had started all of this. An 87%. Such a small thing to destroy a family over. Such a normal grade to end a relationship over. But maybe it hadn't really been about the grade at all. Maybe it had been building for years. All the small moments when I hadn't been quite perfect enough. All the times I'd disappointed them in tiny, incremental ways. Maybe tonight had just been the final straw, the moment when they'd finally admitted that I would never be the daughter they wanted. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and tried to get warm, but the cold seemed to have settled into my bones. I was safe and dry and out of the snow, but I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, blowing the snow against the windows harder. Somewhere across town, my parents were sleeping in their perfect house with their perfect furniture and their perfect lives. And I was here, on a stranger's couch, trying to figure out how to build a life from nothing. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to Helen's gentle snoring from the bedroom, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to worry about disappointing anyone or failing to meet anyone's expectations. I was free to be exactly who I was, even if I didn't know who that was yet. It was terrifying and heartbreaking and liberating all at once. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out what came next. Tomorrow, I would have to face the reality of being 17 and homeless and cut off from everything I had ever known. But tonight, I was warm and safe and free. And for now, that was enough. Helen woke me at 7 with the smell of coffee and something that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen before she died. Pancakes, maybe, or French toast. Something warm and sweet and completely unlike the protein smoothies and wheat toast that constituted breakfast in the Martinez house. I'd been dreaming about my bedroom, about waking up in my own bed with my own alarm clock and my own routine, and for a split second I forgot where I was. Then I saw the unfamiliar ceiling, felt the scratchy couch fabric against my cheek, and everything came rushing back. The fight, the snow, the locked door, the way my father's face had looked when he told me I had 10 minutes to pack. "Good morning, honey," Helen said softly from the kitchen doorway. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied, sitting up and folding the blanket. In truth, I'd been awake most of the night, listening to every sound, wondering if my parents had changed their minds, if they were out looking for me, if they even cared that I was gone. Helen studied my face with the kind of careful attention that made me think she didn't believe me about sleeping fine, but she didn't push. "I made breakfast. Nothing fancy, just pancakes and bacon. I figured you could probably use a good meal." My stomach growled loudly in response, reminding me that I hadn't eaten dinner the night before. The cold chicken on the perfect china seemed like something that had happened years instead of hours. I followed Helen into her kitchen, which was everything my mother's wasn't. Cluttered but clean, lived in but loved. There were dishes in the sink and coffee rings on the counter and a stack of mail that hadn't been sorted through. It looked like real people lived here, people who cared more about comfort than appearances. "Sit," Helen said, pointing to a small table by the window. "Tell me how you like your pancakes." "However you make them is fine," I said, because in my house, there had never been choices about food. Mom made what she made, and we ate it gratefully, because she'd spent time calculating the nutritional value and the caloric content and the proper balance of proteins and carbohydrates. Helen gave me a look. "That's not what I asked. I asked how you like them. With syrup? Butter? Fruit? It's your breakfast, honey. You get to choose." The concept felt foreign. Syrup, I guess? She set a plate in front of me with 3 golden pancakes and strips of bacon that were perfectly crispy. Then she set down a bottle of real maple syrup, not the sugar-free kind my mother bought, and a pat of butter that was already melting. "Thank you," I said quietly, and meant it in a way that went deeper than just the food. Helen poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me. "So, we need to talk about what happens next." I took a bite of pancake, which was fluffy and sweet and tasted like childhood mornings I'd never had. I know, I'll figure something out. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Helen said firmly, but you're also not my responsibility, much as I'd like to help you. I'm 72 years old, honey.
I can't take in a teenager without going through proper channels. My stomach dropped, even though I'd known this was coming. I understand. That doesn't mean I'm throwing you out, Helen continued quickly. It means we need to find you real help, professional help, people who know how to handle situations like this. What kind of people? Social services, for starters. They have programs for kids in your situation. Emergency housing, counseling, legal advocacy. My parents will never agree to that. My dad will fight it. He's a lawyer. He knows how to make things complicated. Helen's expression hardened slightly. Honey, your parents lost the right to have a say in this when they put you out in a snowstorm. What they did last night wasn't discipline. It wasn't tough love. It was child endangerment. The words hit me like a slap. Child endangerment. It sounded so serious, so official, so much bigger than a fight about a test grade. But I asked for it, I said quietly. I told them I didn't want to be part of the family anymore. And you think that gives them the right to abandon you? To put you in danger? Helen leaned forward. Sage, you're 17 years old. You're still a child, legally and practically. Your parents have a responsibility to keep you safe, even when you're angry with them, even when they're angry with you. I picked at my pancakes, no longer hungry. They'll say I was being dramatic. They'll say I was having a tantrum. They'll make it sound like I was the problem. Maybe they will, Helen said, but that doesn't make it true. She stood up and walked to a drawer, pulling out a phone book that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I'm going to call someone, a friend of mine who works with the county. She'll know what to do. What if they make me go back home? Helen looked at me steadily. Do you want to go back home? I thought about it, really thought about it. I thought about my perfect room and my perfect schedule and the perfect life my parents had built for me. I thought about never disappointing them again, never failing to meet their expectations, never having to see that look in their eyes that said I wasn't quite good enough. No, I said quietly. I don't think I do. Helen nodded. Then we'll make sure you don't have to. She disappeared into the living room with the phone, and I could hear her talking in low, urgent tones. I finished my pancakes slowly, savoring the sweetness, the normalcy of a breakfast that was made for pleasure instead of optimization. When Helen came back, she was holding a piece of paper with writing on it. Her name is Linda Vasquez, Helen said. She's a social worker with the county. She's going to come here in about an hour to talk to you. My chest tightened. What will she do? She'll assess your situation. She'll talk to you about your options, and she'll make sure you're safe. Will she call my parents? Eventually, yes, but not until she understands what happened and what you need. I nodded, trying to push down the panic that was rising in my throat. This was really happening. This was really real. I wasn't going home today, maybe not ever. Sage, Helen said gently, I want you to know that whatever happens next, you did the right thing. You protected yourself when no one else would. That takes courage. I didn't feel courageous. I felt small and scared and completely out of my depth. But I nodded anyway. Linda Vasquez arrived exactly an hour later, a middle-aged woman with dark hair and kind eyes who carried a leather briefcase and introduced herself like she genuinely cared about my answer when she asked how I was doing. I'm fine, I said automatically, the same way I'd been trained to respond to that question my entire life. Linda smiled. You know, in my line of work, when someone says they're fine after spending the night on a stranger's couch because their parents locked them out in a snowstorm, I usually suspect they might not actually be fine. Okay, maybe not completely fine. That's more honest, Linda said. Can you tell me what happened last night? I told her the whole story, from the dinner conversation to walking through the snow to knocking on Helen's door. Linda took notes in a small notebook, asking clarifying questions but never interrupting.
never making me feel like my story was too dramatic or too unbelievable. "How long have things been difficult at home?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know. It's hard to say. They've always expected a lot from me, but lately it feels like nothing I do is good enough, like I'm constantly disappointing them. Can you give me some examples?" I thought about it. Last month, I got a B+ on a chemistry test, and they made me drop soccer practice for 2 weeks to get extra tutoring. When I asked if I could go to a movie with friends, they said I needed to focus on my studies instead of socializing. When I mentioned that I might want to study art in college, they told me that wasn't a realistic career path for someone from our family. Linda nodded, writing, "What about physical discipline? Have your parents ever hit you or hurt you?" "No," I said quickly. "Never. They don't do that. They're not abusive. They expect a lot." "Sage," Linda said gently, "putting a minor child out of the house in dangerous weather conditions is a form of abuse. It's called abandonment, and it's illegal." The word abuse felt too big, too serious. Abuse was what happened to kids in foster care, kids whose parents were drug addicts or criminals, not kids whose parents were lawyers and teachers who went to church and volunteered for school fundraisers. "But they were just angry," I said. "They didn't mean for me to get hurt." "What did they think would happen when they locked you out at midnight in a snowstorm?" I didn't have an answer for that. Linda closed her notebook. "I need to make some phone calls. In the meantime, you're going to stay here with Helen, if that's okay with both of you." Helen nodded immediately. "Of course." "What kind of phone calls?" I asked. "I need to speak with your parents. I need to assess whether it's safe for you to return home, and if not, what other options we have." "They're going to be furious." "Probably," Linda agreed, "but that's not your problem to manage anymore." After Linda left, I helped Helen with the dishes, grateful for something to do with my hands. The normalcy of it, the simple act of washing plates and cups, felt soothing after the chaos of the last 24 hours. "Are you scared?" Helen asked as she dried a mug. "Terrified," I admitted.
That's normal. Change is scary, even when it's necessary. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I should have just apologized and gone home and tried harder to be what they wanted? Helen set down the dish towel and looked at me. "Honey, you got an A- on a test and ended up homeless in a snowstorm. Does that seem proportional to you?" When she put it like that, it sounded insane. It sounded like the kind of story you'd hear on the news and shake your head at, wondering how parents could be so unreasonable. "But they sacrificed so much for me," I said. "They worked hard to give me opportunities. Maybe I was ungrateful." "Being grateful doesn't mean accepting mistreatment," Helen said. "It doesn't mean you have to be perfect to deserve love and safety." Linda called around 3 o'clock. I could tell from Helen's expression that the conversation hadn't gone well. "Your parents refuse to allow you to come home unless you apologize and agree to their conditions," Linda said when Helen handed me the phone. "What conditions?" "No more complaints about their expectations, no more emotional outbursts. You would be grounded indefinitely with no social activities and no extracurriculars until your grades improve to their satisfaction. And you would have to see a counselor to work on your attitude problems." "My attitude problems?" That's what they called it. They believe you've become defiant and disrespectful, and they want professional help to correct those behaviors. I thought about going home, about walking back into that perfect house with its perfect furniture and perfect expectations. I thought about apologizing for wanting to be myself, about promising to be more grateful for the privilege of being constantly criticized. What if I don't want to do that? Then we look at other options. Emergency foster care, group homes, kinship care if you have relatives who could take you in. My grandparents are dead. My aunt lives in California and barely speaks to us. I don't really have anyone else. Then we look at foster care or group housing. I won't lie to you, Sage, it's not ideal. The system is overloaded and there aren't enough resources. But it might be better than going home to a situation that's harmful to you. I thought about my parents, about the look on my father's face when he'd opened the door to let me out into the snow, about my mother crying but not protesting, not fighting for me, not choosing me. "I want to stay away from them," I said, "at least for now." "Okay, I'll start making arrangements.
In the meantime, you can stay with Helen for a few more days while we figure out something more permanent. After I hung up, Helen made me a cup of tea, and we sat in her living room, watching the snow continue to fall outside. It was beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the terrifying force that had been the night before. "Do you think I'm making the right choice?" I asked. "I think you're making the only choice you can live with," Helen said. And sometimes that's the same thing. That evening, my phone started ringing. First my mother, then my father, then numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed were relatives who had heard what happened. I didn't answer any of them. My mother left voicemails. The first few were tearful, begging me to come home, promising that they could work things out. Then they became angry, accusing me of being dramatic and manipulative. The last one was my father, his voice cold and formal, like he was speaking to a client instead of his daughter. "Sage, you've made your choice, but you need to understand the consequences. If you want to be independent, you'll be truly independent. Don't expect us to pay for college. Don't expect us to help you with anything. You've chosen to be on your own, so you'll be on your own." I stared at the phone for a long time after that message ended. College had always been a given in my family. Not just college, but the right college. The kind of college that would reflect well on the Martinez name and set me up for the kind of career they approved of. Now that was gone. Everything was gone. My home, my family, my future as I'd always imagined it. But as I sat there in Helen's living room, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like fabric softener and kindness, I realized something. I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. I wasn't worried about disappointing anyone or failing to measure up. I was free. The next morning, Linda arrived with a social worker from the foster care system, a young man named Marcus, who looked like he couldn't be much older than me, but spoke with the authority of someone who'd seen everything. "I found you a placement," he said after we'd talked for an hour about my situation, my needs, my goals. "It's a group home for older teens, kids who are close to aging out of the system, kids who need support, but also independence." "What's it like?" "Structured, but not restrictive. You'll have your own room, shared common areas. There are rules, but they're reasonable. Curfew, chores, check-ins with staff. You'll continue going to your high school if you want, or we can transfer you to one closer to the home." "I want to stay at my school," I said immediately. It was the one piece of my old life that still felt like mine. "That's fine. It's about a 20-minute bus ride." Helen squeezed my hand. "It sounds like a good place. When would I go?" "Today, if you're ready. I know it's fast, but we want to get you settled as quickly as possible." I looked around Helen's living room, at this place that had been a sanctuary for 3 days, at this woman who had opened her door to a stranger and given me safety when my own family wouldn't. "I'm ready," I said. The group home was a large Victorian house in an older part of town, painted yellow with white trim, and a wraparound porch that reminded me of homes in movies about families who actually liked each other. Marcus introduced me to the house manager, a woman named Carol who had graying hair and laugh lines, and immediately made me feel welcome. "We have 6 residents right now," Carol explained as she showed me around, "all between 16 and 18, all working toward independence. You'll fit right in." My room was small but private, with a single bed, a desk, and a dresser. There was a window that looked out onto a tree that was just starting to show signs of spring growth. It wasn't much, but it was mine. "Dinner is at 6, Carol said. "Community meeting is Sunday evenings. Other than that, as long as you follow the basic rules and keep up with school, you're free to live your life." Live your life. Such a simple concept, but one that felt revolutionary after 17 years of living someone else's version of my life. That first dinner was awkward. The other kids were friendly but cautious, clearly sizing up the new girl, trying to figure out what my story was and whether I'd fit into their makeshift family. I learned their names, Jake, Maria, Tyler, Sam, and Destiny, and picked up pieces of their stories. Aging out of foster care, family dysfunction, parents who couldn't or wouldn't take care of them. I felt like an imposter. These kids had real problems, real trauma. I was just the girl who couldn't handle her parents' high expectations. But as the days passed, I began to settle in. I took the bus to school and came home to a place where no one asked about my grades or criticized my choices. I did my homework because I wanted to, not because someone was monitoring my every move. I joined the spring musical, something I'd always wanted to do, but had never been allowed because it would interfere with studying. 2 weeks after I moved into the group home, Linda called to tell me that my parents wanted to meet with me. They're requesting a family meeting, mediated, with me present. They say they want to work things out. My stomach clenched. Do I have to? No, you're under no obligation to meet with them, but it might be worth hearing what they have to say. What if they try to make me come home? They can't force you. The state has custody of you now. Any decisions about your placement have to be approved by the court.
I thought about it for 3 days. Part of me missed them desperately, missed the security of knowing exactly what was expected of me, missed the pride in their voices when I succeeded at something. But a bigger part of me remembered the cold, remembered the locked door, remembered the way they'd looked at me like I was a stranger. Okay, I told Linda finally, I'll meet with them. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at the social services office, in a conference room with fluorescent lights and motivational posters about believing in yourself. My parents arrived in their work clothes, looking professional and put together and completely out of place in the government building. They looked older than I remembered. My mother's makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. My father's shoulders were tense, his jaw set in the determined line that meant he was preparing for battle. "Sage," my mother said when I walked in. Her voice was careful, controlled. "You look different." I was wearing jeans and a sweater I'd bought with my own money from my part-time job at the group home's community center. My hair was longer than my mother usually allowed, and I wasn't wearing the pearl earrings she'd given me for my 16th birthday. "I look like myself," I said. Linda facilitated the conversation, keeping things focused and preventing anyone from getting too emotional. My parents took turns explaining their perspective, their disappointment, their belief that I had overreacted to normal parental discipline. "We love you," my mother said. "We've always loved you. We just want what's best for you." "What you think is best for me," I corrected, "not what I think is best for me." "You're 17, my father said. "You don't have the experience to know what's best for you." "I have the experience to know what makes me miserable." "Being pushed to excel makes you miserable?" my mother asked. "Being given every advantage makes you miserable?" "Being told that I'm never good enough makes me miserable. Being told that my feelings don't matter makes me miserable. Being kicked out of my house for getting an A- makes me miserable." My father's face hardened. "We didn't kick you out for getting an A-. We asked you to leave because you were being disrespectful and ungrateful." "I was trying to tell you how I felt." "You were having a tantrum." Linda intervened before the conversation could escalate further. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, Sage has expressed that she feels your expectations are unrealistic and your responses to her academic performance are disproportionate. How do you respond to that?" "Our expectations are high because we believe in her potential," my mother said. "We know what she's capable of, and we don't want her to settle for less." "But what if what I'm capable of isn't what you think I'm capable of?" I asked. "What if what makes me happy isn't what you want for me?" "Happiness isn't the goal," my father said. "Success is the goal. Security is the goal. Happiness is a luxury that comes after you've built a stable life." "What if I want to be happy now? What if I want to be myself now?" "You can be yourself once you've proven that you can meet basic standards of responsibility and achievement." I stared at him, this man who had raised me, who I'd once thought hung the moon. "So I have to earn the right to be myself?" "You have to earn the right to make your own decisions. That's how the world works." "That's not how this works," I said quietly. "I don't have to earn anything from you anymore. I don't have to prove that I'm worthy of love or acceptance or basic human decency." My mother started crying. "We do love you. We've always loved you. You love the idea of me. You love the perfect daughter you wanted me to be. But you don't love the real me because you don't even know who the real me is." The meeting ended without resolution. My parents wanted me to come home and submit to their conditions. I wanted them to accept that I had a right to be myself, to make mistakes, to be imperfect without being abandoned. Neither of us was willing to compromise. As they stood to leave, my mother turned back to me. "We're not giving up on you," she said. "We're going to fight for you." "I don't want you to fight for me," I said.
I want you to accept me. After they left, Linda and I sat in the conference room for a while, processing what had happened. How do you feel? She asked. Sad, I said honestly, but also relieved. I kept hoping they would understand, but they don't. They can't, and I can't keep waiting for them to change. What do you want to do now? I thought about the group home, about my room with the window that looked out on the tree, about the musical I was rehearsing for, about the friends I was making who accepted me exactly as I was, about the life I was building, slowly and carefully, that belonged entirely to me. I want to stay where I am, I said. I want to finish high school. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be perfect. Linda nodded. The state will support you until you're 18, and there are programs to help you transition to independence after that. College financial aid, job training, housing assistance. My parents said they won't pay for college. There are other ways to pay for college: scholarships, grants, work-study programs. It won't be easy, but it's possible. I thought about that, about working my way through college instead of having it handed to me, about earning my own way instead of having everything given to me with strings attached. It sounded hard. It sounded uncertain. It sounded like the kind of future my parents would consider a failure. It sounded like freedom. 3 months after that meeting with my parents, I was standing on the stage of our high school auditorium, wearing a costume that sparkled under the bright lights, singing a solo that I'd never been allowed to audition for when I lived at home. The spring musical was opening night, and I could see the group home kids in the third row, cheering louder than anyone else in the audience. Carol had driven them all here, even though it was a school night, even though it meant rearranging the house schedule. They held up a banner that said, "Go Sage," in glittery letters that Maria had made during arts and crafts time. For the first time in my life, I had people in the audience who were proud of me, not because I was perfect, but because I was brave enough to try something new. After the show, as I was taking off my makeup in the cramped dressing room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my heart stopped. Saw the musical announcement in the school newsletter. Proud of you. Love. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time, not sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to text back immediately to bridge this gap that had opened between us. But another part of me, the part that had learned to protect itself, reminded me of all the times my mother had said she was proud, only to follow it with suggestions for how I could do better next time. I turned off my phone and went to find my friends. The cast party was at Jake's girlfriend's house, a chaotic celebration where teenagers who had just poured their hearts out on stage could finally relax and be normal kids. I found myself in the kitchen, sharing pizza with Tyler and Sam, talking about everything and nothing, feeling more at home than I had in months. "You were amazing up there," Tyler said, and I could tell he meant it, because Tyler wasn't the kind of person who said things he didn't mean. It felt amazing, I admitted. Scary, but amazing. That's what real life feels like, Sam said. Scary and amazing at the same time. Sam was 18, about to age out of the system, and she'd become something like an older sister to me. She'd been in care since she was 12, and she had a way of cutting through emotional confusion with startling clarity. "Speaking of real life," she continued, "have you thought about what you want to do after graduation?" The question that had once kept me awake at night now felt manageable, even exciting. "I want to go to college, study psychology, maybe social work. I want to help kids like us."
Kids like us? Kids who get told they're not good enough. Kids who get thrown away when they don't meet impossible standards. Kids who need someone to believe in them. Tyler nodded. "That's cool. You'd be good at that." It was such a simple statement, but it meant everything coming from him. Tyler had been in and out of foster homes since he was 8, and his approval wasn't given lightly. 2 weeks later, Linda called with news that changed everything. "There's been a development with your case," she said over the phone. "Your parents are requesting a modification to the custody arrangement." My stomach dropped. What kind of modification? "They want you to be allowed to return home for visits. Supervised at first, then unsupervised if things go well. They're claiming they've been attending family therapy and have made changes." What kind of changes? I don't know the details yet, but we're required to consider their request.
You would need to agree to it, of course. No one can force you to see them. I hung up and sat on my bed, staring out the window at the tree that was now full of green leaves. Spring had turned to early summer, and everything outside looked alive and hopeful. But inside, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety returning. That night at dinner, I told the group home kids about the call. We'd all become close over the months, bound together by the shared experience of being discarded by the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. "What do you want to do?" Destiny asked. She was 16, had been in care for 2 years, and had the kind of wisdom that came from surviving things no teenager should have to survive. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me misses them. Part of me wants to believe they've changed. But part of me is terrified that they haven't, and I'll end up right back where I started." "What does your gut tell you?" Jake asked. I thought about it. My gut tells me that they're doing this because they think they should, not because they actually understand what they did wrong. "Then trust your gut," Carol said from the head of the table. "You don't owe them forgiveness just because they're your parents. You don't owe them a relationship just because they decided they want one now." "But what if I'm wrong? What if they really have changed and I'm throwing away my chance to have a family again?" "Honey," Carol said gently, "you already have a family. It might not look like what you thought a family would look like, but look around this table. These people love you. They support you. They celebrate your successes and help you through your failures. That's what family is." I looked around the table at these kids who had become my siblings, at Carol who had become something like a mother, at this makeshift family we'd created from our shared brokenness. She was right. This was family. But it still didn't answer the question of what to do about my parents. The answer came 2 weeks later when I was working my weekend job at the community center. I'd started tutoring younger kids in math and English, partly because I needed the money, and partly because I'd discovered I was good at it. There was something satisfying about helping a struggling kid suddenly understand a concept, about seeing their face light up when they realized they were smarter than they thought. I was working with a 10-year-old named Marcus who reminded me of myself at that age, all nervous energy and perfectionist tendencies. He was getting frustrated with long division, crumpling up papers and announcing that he was stupid every time he made a mistake. "Hey," I said gently, "making mistakes doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human." "But my dad says I need to get this right," Marcus said, his eyes filling with tears. "He says if I don't get better grades, I can't play baseball this summer." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Marcus, what happens when you get something wrong at home?" "Dad gets mad. He makes me do extra practice problems. Sometimes he yells." Marcus wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "He says he's trying to help me, but it doesn't feel like help." I stared at this little boy who was carrying the same weight I'd carried for 17 years, and something crystallized in my mind. This was why I couldn't go back. Not because my parents were evil or because I wanted to punish them, but because going back would mean accepting that their way of loving was acceptable. It would mean teaching Marcus and kids like him that love was supposed to hurt. "Marcus," I said, "you know what? You're already good enough, exactly as you are. We're going to practice this math because learning is fun, not because you have to be perfect." His whole body relaxed. "Really? Really? And if you make mistakes, we'll fix them together. No yelling, no punishment, just learning." That afternoon, I called Linda and told her my decision. "I don't want to see them," I said. "I don't want visits, supervised or otherwise. I want to stay where I am and build my own life." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I can't go backward. I won't go backward." Linda was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll let them know." My parents didn't take the news well. They hired a lawyer, threatened to fight the state's custody arrangement, claimed I was being brainwashed by the system. For weeks, my caseworker fielded angry phone calls and legal threats. But in the end, there was nothing they could do. I was 17, almost 18, and I had the right to refuse contact. The court supported my decision, especially after Linda submitted a report detailing my progress in the group home and my reasons for wanting to stay away. The legal battles finally ended in August, just before my senior year started. I was sitting on the porch of the group home, reading a book for my AP literature class, when Carol came outside with a manila envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it over. There was no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The letter was short. "Sage, I know you don't want to see us, and I'm trying to respect that. But I needed you to know that I've been going to therapy, trying to understand where we went wrong. My therapist helped me see that we made your worth conditional on your performance, and that was wrong. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not who we wanted you to be. I can't undo the damage we caused, but I want you to know that I see it now. I hope someday you can forgive us. Love, Mom." The photograph was of me at my 8th birthday party, laughing at something off camera, my face covered in chocolate cake frosting. I remembered that day. It was one of the few times my mother had let me get messy, had prioritized fun over cleanliness. I studied the picture for a long time. This evidence that there had been moments of real joy in my childhood, moments when my parents had loved me without conditions. But I also remembered how rare those moments had been, how quickly they'd been overshadowed by expectations and criticism. I folded the letter and put it away. Maybe someday I would be ready to forgive them, but that day wasn't today. Today, I needed to focus on building the life I wanted, not repairing the one that had broken me. Senior year passed in a blur of college applications, scholarships essays, and the constant low-level anxiety of figuring out how to pay for my future. I applied to state schools, community colleges, anywhere I could afford with financial aid and work-study programs. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. I got into the state university with a partial scholarship, enough to make it possible if I worked part-time and took out student loans. It wasn't the prestigious private college my parents had always planned for me, but it was mine. The night before graduation, the group home kids threw me a party. Nothing fancy, just pizza and a cake that Carol had made from a box Mex, but it felt more meaningful than any of the elaborate celebrations my parents had thrown for my academic achievements. "Speech!" Tyler called out, and the others took up the chant. I stood up, feeling awkward but grateful. "I don't know what to say. You guys saved my life." "You saved your own life," Sam corrected. "We just gave you a place to do it." "Okay, then you gave me a place to save my life. You showed me what real family looks like. You taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that I don't have to be perfect to be worthy of care." My voice cracked a little.
I'll never forget that. Later that night, alone in my room, I started packing for college. Among my belongings, I found the navy blazer I'd worn to court hearings, the one Helen had lent me that first week. I'd kept it as a reminder of where I'd been, of how far I'd come. At the bottom of my dresser drawer, I also found the photograph my mother had sent, the one of me at 8 years old, covered in cake frosting and laughing. I looked at it for a long time, then carefully placed it in my memory box, alongside my high school diploma and my college acceptance letter. I was 18 now, officially an adult, officially free to make my own choices, and I was choosing to move forward. College was everything I'd hoped it would be, and nothing like what my parents had planned. I lived in a tiny dorm room with a roommate who stayed up too late and left dishes in the sink. I worked 20 hours a week in the campus library to help pay for textbooks and food. I struggled with calculus and excelled in my psychology classes. Most importantly, I felt like myself for the first time in my life. In my sophomore year, I started volunteering with a local organization that provided support services for homeless teens. Many of them had stories similar to mine, kids who had been kicked out or run away from homes where love came with impossible conditions. I'll never forget the first time I sat across from a 16-year-old girl named Emma who had been living in her car for 3 weeks after her parents discovered she was gay. "They said I could come home if I agreed to go to conversion therapy," Emma told me, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said they were doing it because they loved me." "That's not love," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Love doesn't try to change who you are. Love accepts you. Emma looked at me like I'd handed her a lifeline. "How do you know?" "Because I've learned the difference. I've learned what real love looks like, and this isn't it." Working with these kids, I realized that my experience with my parents hadn't been unique. There were thousands of teenagers out there who were being told that love was conditional,
that they had to earn acceptance, that their authentic selves weren't good enough. I started speaking at high schools about mental health and family relationships. I wrote articles for the campus newspaper about the pressure to be perfect. I organized support groups for students who were struggling with family expectations. In my junior year, I was approached by a nonprofit organization that worked with at-risk youth. They offered me an internship, then a part-time job, then a full-time position after graduation. "We need people who understand," the director told me during my interview. "We need people who have been where these kids are." I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in psychology and a minor in social work. At the graduation ceremony, Carol and the group home kids were in the audience, cheering louder than anyone else. Sam had driven in from 2 states away, where she was working as a nurse. Tyler was there with his girlfriend and their baby daughter. My parents weren't there, but for the first time, their absence didn't hurt. I had built my own family, my own support system, my own life. 5 years later, I was running my own program for homeless and displaced teenagers. We provided emergency housing, counseling services, educational support, and most importantly, unconditional acceptance. On the wall of my office, I kept a framed photograph of my first group of kids, 17 teenagers who had found their way to our program through various forms of family dysfunction. Next to it was a letter from Emma, the girl I'd met during my college volunteer work, who was now a social worker herself. "You saved my life," the letter said, "not by fixing my problems, but by showing me that I was worth saving exactly as I was." I was reviewing case files one afternoon when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says she's your mother." My heart stopped for a moment. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over 6 years, hadn't seen them since that failed mediation meeting when I was 17. "Should I tell her you're not available?" my assistant asked. I thought about it. I thought about the scared 17-year-old I'd been, standing on their front porch in the snow. I thought about all the teenagers I'd worked with since then, all the kids who'd been discarded by the people who were supposed to love them. "No," I said finally, "I'll see her." My mother looked older, grayer, smaller than I remembered. She sat across from my desk like a client seeking services, nervous and uncertain. "You look good," she said finally. "Happy." "I am happy. I've been following your work, the articles in the newspaper, the program you started. I'm proud of you." The words I'd once craved hearing felt strange now, coming too late and without context. "Thank you," I said simply. "I wanted to apologize," she continued, "for what we did to you, for putting you out in the snow, for making you feel like you weren't good enough, for not protecting you from your father's anger, from my own fears about what people would think." I listened without responding, waiting to see what she really wanted. "I've been in therapy for 3 years," she said, "working on understanding why I was so afraid of imperfection, why I couldn't love you the way you needed to be loved." "And what did you discover?" "That I was trying to protect you from a world that I thought would reject you if you weren't perfect. But in trying to protect you, I became the very thing I was afraid the world would be." I nodded. It was a good insight, probably genuine, but it was also 6 years too late. "I'm glad you've learned that," I said. "I hope it helps you." "Is there any chance for us?" she asked, and I could hear the hope and desperation in her voice. "Any chance we could try again?" I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me, who had damaged me so thoroughly that I'd had to build an entirely new life to survive. I felt compassion for her, even understanding, but I didn't feel the pull to reconnect that I'd expected. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not the same person I was when I left. I've built a life that works for me, surrounded myself with people who love me as I am. I'm not sure there's room in that life for people who spent 17 years convincing me I wasn't enough." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I see now what we did wrong, and I wanted you to know that you were always enough. You were always more than enough." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing the conversation. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful reunion, just 2 adults having an honest conversation about past hurt and present realities. And that felt right. That evening, I went home to the small apartment I'd bought with my first real paycheck. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I made dinner for myself and my girlfriend Sarah, a teacher I'd met at a community event who understood my work because she'd grown up in the foster system too. As we sat on my couch, eating takeout Chinese food and watching a terrible movie, I thought about how different my life was from what my parents had planned. I wasn't wealthy or prestigious or traditionally successful by their standards, but I was deeply, authentically happy. I was surrounded by people who loved me without conditions. I was doing work that mattered, helping kids who needed someone to believe in them. I was exactly who I was supposed to be. The last text I ever received from my father came a year later, on my 25th birthday. It was simple. "Happy birthday. We love you and we're proud of the woman you've become." I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Not out of anger, but out of acceptance. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, and that was okay too. Some families weren't meant to stay together, and that was okay too. What mattered was that I'd found my people, built my purpose, created a life that felt authentic and meaningful. What mattered was that every day I got to show teenagers what unconditional acceptance looked like, how to build self-worth that didn't depend on external validation. What mattered was that the scared girl who'd stood in the snow, locked out of her own home, had grown into a woman who would never let another child feel that alone again. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.